Hey everybody, welcome to another artist talk here at Swords into Plowshares Peace Center and Gallery. My name is Ian Matchett. I'm the director here at the gallery, and we're honored to be joined by a few of our out-of-town artists. We're going to be having an artist talk with some of our in-town artists next weekend on Saturday the 12th. But yeah, I'm super excited to have a couple folks who could make it on the line with us today. I'll allow you to introduce yourselves. So if you can just share a little bit about your name, your pronouns, if you work with an org, maybe your medium for folks who've walked through the space. But Ben?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, thank you. Firstly, so much for having us here. This is really fantastic, and I'm just honored to be involved. I'm Ben Stahnke, he, him pronouns. I am currently living in the middle of Puget Sound on an island, Anderson Island, in Washington State, and just moved here from Madison, Wisconsin. But I'm a professor at Central State University back in the Midwest. I teach virtually, PhD candidate, and I'm the editor and art director for Peace Land and Bread, which is, primarily where I pour the bulk of my work into. Do a lot of art for the journal and for our online platforms. And I also am an organizer with the CPUSA. I was a club leader back in Wisconsin, and now currently getting plugged into the Northwest comrades here. Yeah, primarily working digital now. I was a tattoo artist for quite a few years, for like 10 years before I went to grad school. So primarily worked in like physical media. And then I'd say just in the last like 3 years, getting really into digital art, which I like because it's snappy and you can produce digital art pretty quick. That's essentially me.
I'm also very excited to be here with you both and appreciate the opportunity. I love both of your work. My name is Shenby. I'm an artist, cultural worker, and organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. My pronouns are they, she, and you can catch my work at Left Aesthetic on Instagram. I'm primarily a like illustrator, like physical illustrator. I dabble in digital art, but this year especially, I've poured a lot of my efforts into doing more physical media.
Awesome. I love how you like dabble, but you have like a 17,000 person Instagram following and like tons of people know your work. So yeah, you dabble. um, Well, awesome. Yeah, we got a bunch of questions. We're probably not going to get through all of them. They are focused a little bit more on the political aspects of art creation and making art to try to change the world, which kind of goes with our current show that you're both a part of, The World We Need. But yeah, I'll start this off. Either one of you who wants to answer first, please jump in. If we have a little bit of awkward jumble, that's fine. So yeah, how did you get involved in organizing and art making? I think sometimes one of those comes before the other. Did they come at the same time? You each kind of mentioned groups you work with. Is this like the only group you've worked with, or how, like kind of what brought you into art creation and political work?
Yeah, I have been an artist like my whole life, just drawing constantly. So, as I got politicized throughout high school and then after, I wanted to direct my art in a way that I felt really mattered. So, beyond just an interest in politics, I wanted to get involved and actually make a difference. So I became an organizer and have spent the bulk of my organizing career with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So it's definitely uh, time consuming in the sense of I only really make political art, and that's kind of what I do constantly. But it's fun, and I feel very grateful to be able to contribute art towards the movement, and especially such an organized direction, rather than on an individual basis.
And before Ben jumps in, I just like what was some of the early artistic work that like you started because you sounds like you politicized after you started making artwork. Were there like early roles that you played in the movement with your art, or like what was some early work that like let you blend those two?
I think in high school, I really started by making like anti-Trump, like anti-fascist art, and then began as I studied. Like that's what developed my politics more and helped me give further direction to where I wanted to go with my art. And then I think with the 2020 protests, the uprising is when I began full time creating art in the service of the movement, service of the people in the working class. So it really started with some anti-Trump stuff, and then built into not just anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, but pro-people, pro-working class, pro-socialism.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, for me, I got involved in organizing, I'd say back in 2015 or so, with the Communist Party, but my art and my politics were separate for a long time. Well, I'd say my professional art and my politics were separate for quite a long time. I was like I mentioned, I was a tattoo artist. I think I began in the late, 2006 or something like that, and did that for around 10 years or so. And I used to make tattoo flash art that was political, but it was always like on the side. I would do like IRA art and stuff like that and hang it up in the shop, and people, I'd get kind of like weird looks and whatnot, like upside down American flags and things like that. But my art and my organizing never really intersected until I got involved with Peace, Land, and Bread. I'm one of the three, founding members of the Center for Communist Studies. And I think really the crossover between art and organizing, I mean, really for me, involved, it sort of like evolved in the Center for Communist Studies. I took over our social media. I think we had, like in the very beginning, tried publishing and doing these various things. And it was just met with sort of like, we didn't have that many followers, and so we're going to give it up, I think, at one point. I said, let me take over the social media and see if I can give it a go, and so I just began to sort of like mess around with digital art. I had zero experience in it. It was all like fine art trained and stuff. And essentially, yeah, from making like infographics and stuff, that's really where the sort of like overlap, I think, between politics and art for me came. And then that just really evolved over time. Getting feedback and seeing what folks really sort of like vibe with and what really worked, what the movement needs. And then I think slowly, yeah, my like organizing and art began to overlap. I got really, I think, more heavily into digital art. And then I think back in 2020, we kicked off the journal Peace, Land, and Bread from the Center for Communist Studies. And that was really where it was at. I think our goal was to really capture that super like forward thinking and progressive and avant-garde nature of like socialist art more generally, that was around in the early 1900s. I mean, it's very progressive. I think there's like, for a while anyways, like in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was this general idea that socialist art had like really stagnated. And there's like those like trope images, of like Marx and Lenin that everybody, it's like the clip art that everybody uses, right? And kind of leans into for like whatever posts. But yeah, I think our goal was to really capture that sort of like progressive and avant-garde nature, and to really lean into like, what socialist artists were doing in the early 1900s, to lean into that lineage and how can we move that forward. And so I think from that, yeah, the art just began to evolve through Peace, Land, and Bread, and it really caught on and folks really seemed to like it, which was really inspiring. And yeah, it just kind of went from there. But it's really humbling, it's really humbling. And I feel like, like Shenby, all of my art now really is like political art. And all of my art, it serves the movement more generally. I'm involved now with the Communist Party's design collective, and I'm, presently working on an illustrated party program and all these various things. And it's like super fulfilling as an artist, I think, to have your art mean more than just like art for art's sake, like it's art for like the movement's sake or art for the people's sake. I think is really fulfilling. So I get a lot more out of it now.
Yeah, I think just as each of you are talking, it sort of reminds me both like where we used to be as far as the left in this country, and like how many institutions are starting to crop up. Like I watched Peace, Land, and Bread grow online. And like I think I've seen both of your work connected also to like the People's Forum. PSL has done, I think, a really good job of centering artwork as well in like
Absolutely.
their general like social media presence, their protest presence, like the way that I think both the left has grown and we've built these, like we and obviously a lot of other folks have built these institutions, is just I think really exciting. I very much remember back in like as we all date ourselves gently with like the different eras, back in college in 2009 and 10, the socialist group was like the 10 people we could get together from like any socialist organization to be in like a room together, and we tried to be a very non-sectarian. And like now there's like 3 or 4 socialist groups on campus, and there's an actual like there's art clubs around politics. And that just listening to y'all talk about how much that has grown gives me a lot of warmth. And it's just good to feel. I think one of the things that really interested me in talking with both of you and Rachel, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it with us today, was the way that all of you approached like being an artist. I'm used to working with a lot of artists in my role with the gallery, and often they're very picky about presentation and like the number, especially like if you're doing digital art, an edition and how many prints and like how like yeah, producing scarcity and intending to make sure that your work is will rise in value over time. And there's important parts to that as an artist, like making sure you can eat and stuff if that's like part of your income. But yeah, I'm curious to see how like both of you were basically like print it, put it on the wall. I'm good with that. Whatever. Like, I'd send you like email updates with like breakdowns of okay, if we sell everything, here's how much money you'd make. And you're like, cool, I don't care, Ian. Let's move forward. So yeah, how do you all each view yourselves as artists? I mean, you've talked a lot about like the political aspect of your work, but do you like see yourself as sort of separate from that role? Do you identify fully as an artist, or is it more as like you, like Shenby, you mentioned like cultural worker? Yeah, how do you kind of like interact with that word or that identity?
You want me to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Apologies.
I don't like to consider myself an artist, right? Like I've been an artist my entire life, if I'm going to use that term, right? But there's something about that to me that feels like super idealistic, and it feels like very individualist. And there's this idea that the artist is somehow like separate or divorced from the masses of people, and that art, emerges, in the artist's mind out of nowhere, and there's no cultural or material context for it, which I think is all false, right? And I think for that reason, I would consider myself an artisan, more so in that I'm involved in production. I'm involved in like the creation of materials that serve a direct function, that serve like a direct purpose. And I think, I don't know. So I'm just very averse to calling myself an artist, even though maybe I am. I don't like it, I don't like it for that reason. And I think really, I mean, yeah, I think we're all kind of in the same boat here, in that the idea that our art really needs to like serve the people and serve the movement. And oh, what's that quote? So Walter Benjamin quote that, history ultimately breaks down into a series of images and not stories, and this idea that like art really is like indicative of like specific times in history. It's really indicative of like, political forces and movements. And I think that, us as artisans and as artists, just existing in service of that, I think is more, it connects us to humanity, it connects us to the earth more. And it doesn't like, the idea that like, oh, I'm an artist, and like that to me feels like very separating, and it feels very isolating, and I don't like it. So I think, yeah, artisan, I would call myself an artisan, like in that I'm concerned with production, like production art and stuff, and all free. Yeah, take it, print it, I try to give it all away for free.
I feel very similarly. I feel like when people ask me what I do, I'm like, yeah, I'm an artist. That's like if someone just comes up to me, I'm like, yeah, I'm an artist. But to be specific, I'm a cultural worker because, as you said, we're engaged in production. We are workers, and there is a tendency, I feel, especially amongst the art community, that by labeling yourself as an artist, or this one pushes me to my limits a little more, the creative.
Right.
You kind of isolate yourself from the working class when we're still engaged in production. So by calling myself a cultural worker, it gives itself an identity within the working class. It also makes it clear that I'm building culture and that we're engaged in a movement to transform that, rather than as separate from it. And so, as a cultural worker, I think you got to identify with the people rather than outside the people. And like I said, that's why I bristle a little bit when people call themselves creatives, because some of the most creative people are not particularly cultural workers. A nurse has to be extremely creative in the way they handle conflict resolution and making sure they keep someone alive. There's different levels of creativity that I think everyone has. So I'm definitely a cultural worker, and like you said, I don't make a lot of money for my art, really. I just like to give it out. People will be like, hey, can I use this in a project? I'm like, sure. Here's the file. And especially being connected to an organization, there's a project bigger than just myself, which is why, anytime the party might call on me, the art is for the movement. Right. That's also why, I may have my signature in the piece, but other than that, there's no real limited edition copies or anything like that, especially because everything's like reproduced. I just have like drawing books and bins in the basement that has all the originals, but that's not the point.
That's the retirement. That's yeah. Later, once you're wildly famous as a revolutionary artist, minister of culture, well, We'll bring out the books to make sure you can retire, comrade.
There we go.
Yeah, no, I empathize with both of those stances. I think like it's a little weird as an oil painter, which is one of my primary mediums. I've been dabbling with Inkscape, which is the cheapo digital art program that I use. But yeah, trying to like oil paintings take a lot of time, and so how do you like make back the money from that time if you can in some ways, and make it somewhat sustainable even just for studio rent is like definitely a contradiction that is a little harder. It's also like just not good to paint in your own home with oil paints because of the many things that you will imbibe through the walls, unless you got really good ventilation. So yeah, I think there's like in some of the fine arts, I think there is some interesting contradictions that emerge around that. But yeah, I really identify with what you're saying there. I think like I'm trying to decide which direction to go. I think we'll go positive. So like, who do you say, you've mentioned a little bit about like the party calling on you, about wanting people to get your work. I think like there's this core question that certain comrades have brought up around art creation. And it kind of has like two aspects. And I think one is like, who do you make artwork for? Like, who is the audience that you're trying to reach and connect with? And then how do you go about making artwork for that group? I have a feeling I know who the group you're both going to mention, but I'll let you mention them. Like, so who do you make artwork for, and how do you go about like actively making work that connects with them?
Sure. I mean, like you already know the answer. It's the working class. It's for the masses of people. And I think back, I think the People's Forum had taught me something like organize everyone that can be organized, educate everyone that can be educated, something along those lines. And so I make art for everyone that can be organized and everyone that can be educated. And that's kind of the purpose of the art. So when I look at like, you know, making a piece, there's another quote, I think it's something along the lines of people aren't fighting for ideas, they're fighting for their lives, their real world conditions. And so how can you make art that speaks to that rather than just vague ideas? So I think as I've grown as an artist, I've definitely pushed myself to, people aren't fighting for the ideas of Marx and Lenin as like putting their big face on a poster and being like, this will cause the revolution. Because I mean, they're dope, but you want to be like, hey, we want to make sure everyone gets food. We want to make sure that housing is free and that everyone can have access to it. How can you put those ideas into your art? So I think more and more I've involved study into my art more, looking at, okay, what are the contradictions that we're seeing right now? What are the demands of the working class movement in this moment? And then looking at the long term, how can we connect those two? And so like, for instance, I'm making a piece right now about the midterms, and it's tough. How can you both emphasize that, okay, we've got the far right on the move, on the offensive, and then you've got the liberals not doing a damn thing about it, but also emphasizing, hey, we need our own independent working class movement. So I had to like erase my page like I think 5 times or something, because trying to figure out that balance and making sure you have the right message is really important, because you want to speak to the most amount of people that you can without isolating yourself. And I think that's one of the hardest things that I've been learning how to do. So I think when I make a piece, I'm trying to think, okay, how do I reach people that maybe aren't in the same mindset I am in, but can help push them forward so we can be on the same level? And how can they push me forward? How can their ideas, how can the working class reality as a cultural worker inform what I do too, making sure that we live in this symbiotic relationship?
Yeah, that's super inspiring to hear that. I think I really strive to do that more in my art. I think like just the way this evolved with Peace, Land, and Bread, the journal was like, it started off as a scholarly journal for communists working in theory, working in cultural work. And so I think a lot of the art initially that grew up around Peace, Land, and Bread was really art for communists, which isn't necessarily like the driving purpose of working class art or proletarian art more generally, which is like what you've said, it has to reach the most amount of people. It has to speak to real material needs that oftentimes transcend like party line. It transcends politics. These are just like physical needs that human beings need to survive and thrive and, produce and reproduce. But to circle back to that, yeah, like a lot of the art that I began to create was, I think the idea was that like, okay, this is like art that's for communists, which isn't necessarily bad, right? That has to happen also. We have to have party art and these various things. But I think that just as like as we've gone on, I think we're in the we're in the, you know, going into the third year now. I'm really trying to come back more to art that's not necessarily like just for communists or speaking just to communists. But I mean, yeah, like it's involved in that study of really like what do people need, what really like resonates most with people. Yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to say on that, but yeah, that's definitely, I think that's essentially where I've came from. Like, you know, starting off with making art for communists and really, you know, trying to transcend that a bit. Well, that's tough too, right? Because we do a lot of publications. Like, so we're also a book publisher, like through Iskra Books, you know, we produce these, you know, like, you know, new works of theory, you know, older works of theory that are out of production. And so, for example, we're publishing, you know, political and theoretical thinkers that oftentimes like rub people the wrong ways, right? Like Kim Il-sung or, you know, Joseph Stalin or Lenin. And that's tough, right? Because I have to make art that revolves like specifically around those figures, right? So that art is like by necessity, it's for communists, I think. But what I really try to do like with those is to create art that's not just like communist trope art, right? Like it's really like, I don't know if I have it close by, but the cover for Socialist Education in Korea, which we're doing the launch for pretty quickly. It's like trying to make something that's a little less like overtly like stereotypically communist and trying to make this more of like people's art that includes like communist figures. So that's always a tension I think we're working with at Peace Land and Bread, you know, like, okay, this is like specifically communist stuff, but how do we sort of like make this appealing, you know, to as many people as possible? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
well,
tough.
yeah, I think that like that's something that I play with in my work too. I think is this idea of what some of those figures mean to some of us and why that I think that art is successful for some people. And I think that's what I try to do sometimes with my work is try to bring people to an understanding of why an image of Lenin means something to one person and maybe means something to another person. I think like it's not that you love this human. I think there are people who are like a little bit more just like adoration and blindly like I love Lenin because Lenin. And it's more like, yeah, no, I mean Lenin had his ups and downs. He was a human. There were positives and negatives. But like what at least for me, and I think like what interests me about some of these figures is like this idea of what they represent and like what some of these images of them represent as like as the power of working people, like the idea that capitalists feared this image, that capitalists sought to keep this from us, keep this history from us, that they've sought to erase this history. And I think that like, yeah, I try to combine like sort of like present day people who you don't know, and paint them just as like intensely as I would paint like an image of Lenin, as a way of sort of like making that connection between like, yeah, your neighbor who's like fighting for your block club is doing the work and like empowering their neighbors and like fighting for working people. And you should look at them the same way you look at some of these revolutionary figures from the past. And you can get an understanding of like, if you love your neighbor, why maybe somebody like really connects with this past figure. I think like that's more interesting to me than like, should we or shouldn't we like work on an image of Lenin, for example? And it's more like, yeah, how do we get that feeling of strength, of like joy, of a hope for the future? That I think at one time, maybe an image of Lenin did that for more people than it does today.
Right.
But I still think there's an efficacy there, and it's like finding how we do that more frequently. And I think both of your work really does that. Again, using our example, whether you do an image of Lenin or not, both of your work I think really calls people into this like hope for a future struggle in a way that I think sometimes artwork in general struggles to do, and specifically left-wing artwork can sort of, by being sort of tried and boring, not do as well.
I think some like when we're talking about these really historical figures, it's so important for us as cultural workers to also build education. And there is something powerful about being like, hey, you know, without revolutionary theory, there's no revolutionary movement. And look at like these people that the US has demonized over and over. They don't want you to appreciate them because of the success of the people and the movements. So like for one, beautiful book cover of Kim Il-sung, one of the most demonized people here in the US, you know, but it's important that people understand like who he really was, who the Workers' Party of Korea is, and these different movements, because that educational is one of our our biggest tools and our biggest weapons in the struggle. So
Absolutely.
definitely think it's really, trust me, the Thomas Sankara piece you made recently for Peace, Land, and Bread is one of my favorites. And then
Thank you.
some of the portraits you've done, Ian, are just gorgeous.
Can you tell we like each other's work? Like every couple of minutes, we're like, "That thing you did, really great." No, thank you.
Right. Yeah, I'm such huge fans. It's really, like, I mean, I said it in the beginning, but it is such an honor just to be talking with you both. I mean, I'm just such massive fans, and I'm really inspired too. And I think what you said, Shenby, about like looking to what people want and like looking to what really like reflects the movement and this moment in history, I'm equally inspired by you all, right? Like I follow you all, like, and I look at your work consistently, and it's really inspiring, you know, to look at what other revolutionary artists are doing, specifically you both. And yeah, like just getting inspired by that, knowing that you're part of a sort of like moment in history that really is like, there's a bunch of fantastic artists. And I think the People's Forums, what was the name of the exhibit? Reverberations, or the one that was the Haiti art recently, which I think we all contributed to. That was like mind-blowingly cool, and there were some phenomenal artists in there. And it really is like just knowing that we exist in a moment in history, in revolutionary history, where there is such a solid collection of artists now. It's really inspiring. It's inspiring stuff. And you know, we're inspired by the people, and we're inspired by the movement, and by, you know, the promises of the future. But I'm equally inspired by you all too. So
And yeah,
stuff.
I think as a good materialist, I think we can see that like for years there were lefty artists making work and being like, everyone should be really excited about lefty artwork. But it wasn't until a mass movement emerged that was able to feed those artists, like allow us to develop more, and then also allow us to have a venue to actually create work. Like you couldn't put the art before the movement had to develop alongside, and like it's been a reciprocal relationship. And yeah, as a Marxist, I think it's exciting to actually see that dynamic play out in real life, and like a revival of working class and revolutionary culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were actually, somebody wrote us an email. It was, I think, after we published our second or third issue. And not to just throw these comrades under the bus, but it was the comrades from the Communist Party Great Britain in Edinburgh or something. And the guy was like,
but to immediately throw them under the bus, you explicitly named.
Let me just throw them under the bus real quick. But it was ridiculous. And I think, you know, I mentioned this to really sort of like just maybe like shine a light on that. I mean, that bias exists in communist and socialist and working class spaces, that like revolutionary art like has to be dull. I mean, the feedback from these comrades was like, what are you doing? You know, like, what are you doing with this journal? This is not what communist art looks like. This is not how revolutionary art is supposed to look. Revolutionary art is supposed to look like this. And they provided some examples, and it was like a high school newsletter. It was the same clip art that you've seen a million times of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. And like, those are cool. Like you said, Shenby, we like those things, and we're drawn into the movement in part because of those images. But it's like, we're at the, like, as communists and as materialists and as, you know, Leninists, we're at the forefront. We're trying to be at the forefront of these movements, right? And we're trying to push things forward and be avant-garde and be progressive. And yeah, just to have feedback from that person was like, wow, okay, I guess we're doing the right thing. You know, we're pushing this forward a little bit. But it was funny just to feel some of that pushback from communist spaces too. Like, whoa, communist art's supposed to look like this. And it's like, well, we're communists and we're doing art. It's going to look like how we do. You know, it's not like, it doesn't, like, we're not trying to do something that specifically like looks communist. We're just communist and socialist, and we're doing art. We're organizers. And this is just what socialist art looks like in, you know, the 2020s right now. And yeah, it's wild stuff. It's wild to get pushback from both sides, you know.
I'm going to make a little word counter for the times we say communist and Lenin in this episode.
Nice. 15,000.
Well, yeah, I think we've talked a lot about like our enthusiasm and like our connection to movement work. I'm curious if you all have thoughts around what holds artists back from being more effective for the movement, or for being more useful to working class struggle, or just even from like engaging in general, whether they want to be effective or not. I know a ton of artists from like school and from life who just like are doing other things, or are disengaged either with their artwork or with their whole lives. And just, yeah, what do you see as some of those obstacles that either you yourself have felt, or that you see other artists sort of like running into that hold them back?
I genuinely believe that one of the biggest factors is the disconnect from organization. There's a lot of individual creation with a lack of organization, but we know from history that individuals don't make history. It's organization, and it's masses of people. So connecting yourself to something bigger and a specific political program is really important, because that's how you can actually create change. It gives you direction. It can build this relationship where your art is, it's not just your art, it's art for the people, and it's the people's art. And I think that also ties into the individualist aspect that unfortunately plagues so many artists. We exist where, you know, in order to make sure you're successful with your art, it has to be your name. It has to have limited editions. It has to exist in this market. It has to exist in this museum or show. And so often that draws artists to create works that either are not political, or if they are political, are so detached from reality that they almost they're detached from reality. Like these are the there's so many different factors, I think, that hold back artists a lot. And I think generally it's, you know, lack of organization, the art market putting restrictions and demands on artists, and then also just the material conditions of the fact that we live in like a crushing capitalist system where you have to work and you got to make money. So the advertising and marketing departments are bigger draws than working at Starbucks or in a factory and making art outside of that.
Right. Yeah, that's super well said. I actually was going to say the same thing about the party and organization oversight, and I don't know if I could say it like any better than that. It really is like not being a part of a movement, not being a part of a party, you know, making art. I mean, yeah, making art for yourself, really, and not having any checks on your art, not making it and checking with people and saying like, is this reflective of like who we are as an organization, who we are as a party. Like you see that with theory too. You see it with scholarship, and you see it with theory, and you see it with, you know, like socialist theorists and communist theorists who are like outside of the party apparatus. And it's really like a lot of it becomes counter-revolutionary, you know, and it becomes, you know, it becomes anti-communist in a certain sense, and that they, like a lot of people will really spend their time like, I don't know so much in the art world, maybe, you know, but in the theoretical world, it really is a lot of time is spent, you know, bashing the parties. And it's like, it's such political, like it's political idealism ultimately, right? This idea that like, there's no perfect form and, oh, well, this isn't good enough, you know, and it's people that don't struggle in movements. It's people that have never had to organize with other people in the real world. Yeah, people who are massively disconnected, you know. So in the theory world, I think that really is similar to the art world, you know. And like I said, I haven't really seen a lot of that, but I'm sure it exists. Yeah, just the idea that like disconnected from the movement, disconnected from the party, you know, you are just a free agent, and to get your likes and to get your follows up, you got to critique the existing structures, and it, you know, it becomes anarchism at a certain point, and it becomes, yes, like super counter-revolutionary.
Yeah, no, I mean, full disclosure, I'm not a member of a party, but I do feel like a detachment from organizing and like community, it kind of extends beyond like what you're saying around party, where it's sort of like you're making work ultimately for the audience at a gallery or the audience that you've imagined on the internet. And either one of those, I think, drifts pretty heavily towards like a petty bourgeois outlook of like essentially like, let's make our money, let's like create rare objects, let's create some, like there's a huge emphasis in art around what hasn't been done. And I think I'm not sure if making sort of like self-referential like postmodern work hasn't been done at this point. There's a lot of people who are like, if I find a new way to display like this object that's like this new cutting edge, it's like, I don't know, we've been displaying random objects in new ways for 50 years now. Is this really, I think maybe like helping build working class solidarity and a new better world might be the real cutting edge new thing to do with artwork.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think that I definitely I echo heavily what both of you have said there.
I think looking at just the history of art, it's like it's a very like coordinated and indirect reason that artists are disengaged from organization. Like, you know, looking at feudalism, art was a social tool to reinforce, you know, that feudal class. And like art continued to play that. And it's continued to play that role through marketing and advertising under capitalism. But through the creation of that private market, you just get artists who think that art exists for art's sake, and it's completely devoid of the real world, and it can just exist on its own, like its own universe. And I think it's, that's why there's literal proof that the CIA funded and started MoMA and like different large art institutions. Because when you look at art and you detach it from its social use, you can like nullify any power it has, or in fact harness that power for their own purposes. So I think it's time that like as cultural workers, as artists, artisans, we can like retake that social use and use the work we create for a greater purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think we could repeat what you said, but I think that sounds like the thing to say there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think maybe to pivot a little bit, in our last little bit here. Yeah, how do you go about creating a piece of work? I think both of you have like your own, like I've seen like concept, or not concept, but like early stage sketches and stuff online. But yeah, do you start? Yeah, I won't project. How do you go about, like, you got a new piece you want to make or a new intention to create? How do you like kind of enter that and start making something?
Yeah, on our end, it's really like we're inspired by the moment. So if there's something that needs to be done, I think Shenby mentioned earlier, if the party, asks you to make something, there's that sort of impetus. But I think for the individual art piece, I mean, for me anyways, with Peace, Land, and Bread, it's really like there's a need for it, right? Like it's, I think as communists, we're really interested, like we don't have a lot of holidays, so we celebrate birthdays and death days and, the dates of popular events. And so I think that will really, like, there's nothing more inspirational than that for me. Like, oh, today is, Thomas Sankara's birthday. It's time to make a piece of art, and that'll really put some like motivation under me. But yeah, it's sort of like, I don't know, to avoid the mystical language, of art that happens sometimes, it's like, "Ooh, it just happens, it just kind of comes out of nowhere." I think there's there's like material processes there, and I think, I don't know, it's tough to say, like the process of creation, like how does that happen, or where does it come from? For me, it's really, I do a lot of digital art now. I use Procreate, I use an iPad. So I think it's really, there's a search for like inspirational images for me, so for example, a lot of the stuff is like portraiture, or it's like, digital gouache painting or something. And I'll try and find an image that really, I think like an image of the individual. So say if we're just doing something that revolves around person, say Thomas Sankara, it's like, okay, like what image, is going to work best for this? Find an image and, try to really, I think, not just recreate the same stuff. So if I've been leaning heavily into like certain color palettes, I'll try to like change that up a little bit. It's tough to get away from always doing red, right? As Marxist, it's like the color. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it just sort of like it takes on a life of its own. Then there's, I think what tattooing taught me is, like there's like a specific set of time that you're gonna, or a specific like amount of time that you're gonna give to a piece, and then you're gonna call it good after that. And some pieces will really go a lot longer, and some pieces will take a bunch of days. But for me, it's really like I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna create this piece, and at the end of me sitting down, like whatever I've done is done, and it's finished and it's good enough, and that's kind of where it's gonna be. And for good or for ill, right? That was just the mindset, and like in tattoo art, like you sit down, you create a piece of like production art, and that's it. So I think, yeah, it's, I don't know, yeah, finding the correct images and, trying to really, capture, I think, like what we're trying to go for. Like if it's the anniversary of somebody's birth, that's obviously a different piece than the anniversary of somebody's death. Or, is the event like lively? Is it a sad event, to try and capture those feelings a little bit? And, I don't know. That seemed very like abstruse. Hopefully that wasn't like too mystical, or like, I don't know. I don't know if I really have a good answer for that. Maybe is the, the ultimate takeaway there.
I think I also have that image stage where like the very beginning of a piece is like, oh gosh, what am I going to create now? And like looking at tons of different references. I have like a massive folder on my computer of like just revolutionary art from the past. Like when I'm really looking for some inspiration, I'll go and look and see like, okay, here's how they played with lines, with color, with shading, and like, you know, how can we not necessarily replicate, but get inspired by that? Um, and so that first stage for me is always just like, how can I convey this idea like in a really effective manner, but also like use my style, which I think as I've drawn more and more this year, like I've kind of found a style. Like I hope I don't get like stuck in, just one thing, but it tends to be like, oh, that kind of looks like Shenby's art. And the second stage for me is always the hardest, because that's when I erase constantly. It's just like I typically draw a box, and then I just draw with, I use blue pencil because it's a special non-photo blue, so it doesn't scan. And I will, try and like basically get a skeleton, and then get add on from there, like progressively press harder, so that way it's like you can tell, like, okay, this is the line I'm going to illustrate. That always takes the longest because I erase constantly. I double guess myself, and by the time I'm finished, it's like a sigh of relief, and the actual inking process is like a very like calm, like, wow, it's coming together, like it looks good, that kind of like reinforcing how I feel. But I definitely think it's like that 3-stage process of, conceptual work, actual like labor, and then, the third part's still labor, but it's almost like the reward. So that's kind of how I go about it. I think you're muted, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So unprofessional. I heavily empathize with the image farming that both of you mentioned, where there's like, yeah, and I definitely try to find non-generally used images often. Like you were mentioning up, like you're looking for an image of Kim Il-sung, you don't want the one that's on the button because that's the one that
Right.
everyone's seen. And so, yeah, I'm always trying to find like obscure archives of like weird photos. Like if I find like some site that randomly posts like 65 images of Che, I'm like, okay, well, let's go download some of these because I'm never finding this website again. So heavy empathy on the internet image farming. Yeah, no, I think I'm trying to it's trying to pick these questions out. We only have a few minutes left here.
I don't know if it bears mention real quick, just to circle back to the process thing. There are
Yeah,
some really, there's some fantastic, oh, I forget the name of the site. I'll have to share it with you, comrades, but it's old Soviet book covers from the early 1900s. And I think some of the best Soviet art occurs by these people who are never really named, but it occurs on these book covers. And it's like for hardcover books, so like it's this like long rectangle with a fold around. Beautiful, just beautiful, beautiful art. And I'm super duper inspired by old Soviet book covers. I don't know if that would be helpful, or like Bears mentioned, sorry to horn in with that, but yeah, I'd forgotten about that. There's a lot of inspiration I draw from those.
how dare you offer resources? Yeah, no, I think maybe you've both mentioned this a little bit, is like kind of how you draw inspiration from Marxism, obviously, but I think often artists don't prioritize studying politics. And so I'm curious, like, if you have like a pitch for like why a new artist, even a lefty artist, like why read theory? It's not, especially if it's not about art, like why read theory, and like maybe like what pitfalls do folks fall into if they don't like kind of engage with a more holistic organizing and theoretical perspective of like why socialism, as opposed to just like I like this image from the past and like that aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Walter Benjamin quote, right? That, fascism aestheticizes politics, right? Like it makes politics like emotional, and it it arts up politics, And I think the response there is that as communists, we need to politicize art. And it's like we're engaged in struggle. I think as workers' movements, as people's movements, we're engaged in a struggle against ideas and against people, who, don't have our best interests at heart, and who are, trying to oppress and extract, resources from us and whatnot. And we're engaged in a struggle, whether we like it or not, and as artists, we can be sort of blind to that. We can be unaware of it. We can, forget about it and try to do art for art's sake. But I think Walter Benjamin would argue that doing art for art's sake, in light of the idea that fascism aestheticizes politics, and as communists, we have to politicize art. I think that, the idea that art for art's sake, without any overt politics or without any overt study of theory, political theory, Marxist theory, like workers' theory, I think it really just feeds, it's the idea of like being neutral in the face of aggression, right? Like you're benefiting the aggressor in that situation. So I think in recognition of the idea that we're in struggle, in recognition of the tools that fascism uses against workers and against poor people and against subaltern people, I think it makes sense that as artists, if we're going to not serve the oppressor and if we're not going to like feed fascism, we have to be political. I mean, art by nature is political, whether we like it or not. It's either serving, it's serving the oppressor or it's serving the oppressed. And I think there's a bunch of good theory and quotes you could throw at new artists, but I think that just the idea that, as in politics, what am I trying to say here? As in politics, neutrality, like there's no neutrality, right? Like you're neutral and you're feeding the aggressor, the oppressor. I would lean into some quote that, sort of revolves around that, I think.
I agree. I think when the artist kind of disengages from the study, they can tend to kind of think that what they think in their mind is the exact correct thing, and so that can be translated into your work. But is that the correct thing for the movement? Is that the correct position for the masses of people? And by studying, you can learn to remove your own personal judgments. I mean, it's certainly, as you study, you'll personally like take in this more and more, but through study, you can apply your art in a more directed manner, and you learn to use your art in a way that is not for the benefit of yourself. So I think study is an important part of removing individuality. And I also think study is important because we don't want to just be removed from the situation like we've been talking earlier. Like, you want to be an organizer, you want to be like involved in a local, like what do your neighbors need? You can't just make an art piece about what they need if you don't talk to them. And that's part of study. You got to ask and you got to educate yourself about what they need. And I think it's important for artists to do this, because if they don't, you're gonna kind of like remove yourself, and then you end up playing into these tropes of like you're either petty bourgeois, you could get anarchistic, you could get ultra left, you could get right wing, anti-communist. You can fall into these traps, but you can really ground yourself by constant education in the education of politics theory. Like I mentioned, without revolutionary theory, there's no revolutionary movement. History proves that. It's important for us to study these things. And when you do study, your art gets better because those politics, they inform what you do. And then you can start thinking, okay, here's the different level of forces that this piece wants to speak to. How can I translate that into this work? That study helps that. You can't just like look at a piece of paper, haven't studied a single thing, and be like, this piece is going to change the world, and revolution's going to happen once everybody sees this art piece. That's just not how it works. So like, you really have to ground yourself in theory and study, and organization's the way to do it. So.
Yeah, no, I think I would heavily echo that. And I think that like, yeah, an artist can get lucky and make a piece that connects with many people and like says a thing that is very useful to making the world a better place. But if you want your artwork to do that step, I think like what I'm hearing from both of you is just like, you have to understand why. It can't just be like you occasionally get lucky and like say the right thing at the right time that connects with people's needs and interests and the way the world should go. You also have to learn and grow and be a part of the struggle. You can't be separate from the workers. You can't be separate from the struggle. You have to be engaged. Yeah.
I want to insert like a small anecdote where I won't name names, but you see someone
disparage the British Communist Party. Apparently that's on the table.
Blame it on them. Blame it on the Edinburgh people.
No. There's an artist I saw who had this really popular piece. It spoke to a lot of people. It was fairly political. But I went on their page and I was like, wow, this must be like a revolutionary artist. And then I'm seeing that they're creating works for like Spotify. And like you see it and you're like, okay, you really spoke to people with your art piece, but I don't see that level of engagement with study, because now you're doing work for corporations that's furthering their agenda too. Like your work is beautiful, yes, it's technically amazing, but when you're creating something, you can't play it both ways. And I see that level of like, okay, you got paid for this gig and like you made something beautiful, but what level of forces are you contributing to? Are you making art for the musicians that Spotify is stealing thousands and thousands and more from? Or are you making a piece for Spotify that's, you know, actually robbing the artists themselves? So that's just like a small anecdote why I think study is important. You have to ground yourself. You have to be consistent.
I think it also bears mention too that the tactics that the Congress for Cultural Freedom used when they were funding artists, funding, you know, counter-revolutionary artists under the name of like revolutionary art in the 1960s, the idea that they really tried to foster the most was that the artist had to be a critique of all power structures. Like the individual artist needs to critique all power. Like all power is worthy of our sort of, and it is. Like in some regards, we can like critique things. However, like the idea I think there was that like the idea that a broken clock is like right twice a day, right? Sometimes these things will be revolutionary, but it really like who is that serving? When all power structures are critiqued, and if the artist is like unaligned towards a specific movement or like theoretically ungrounded, what happens there is that anarchistic thing where there's like, oh well, capitalists and like in power are bad, like, which is correct, but then they go even further where it's like, oh, like worker states are bad, they're authoritarian, the people can never have power, we have to critique all power structures. And what that does is just feed like status quo, like extant power structures, and the CIA really leaned into that through the Congress of Cultural Freedom, this idea that the artist has to critique all power structures and be theoretically ungrounded. So I think that really just further emphasizes that, right? Like you need to have theoretical orientation, right? Like without theory, there's no practice. Without theory, there's no revolutionary movement. Without theory, there's no revolutionary art, I think, similarly.
Well, and I think that like the question is not so much that you don't critique or that you don't engage with reality. Like we all know that there are problems in worker states, and there have been problems historically, and like great harms have been done within worker states. But it's the when, where, and how. How do you, as an artist, like making something that supports a CIA line, is that actually helping fight totalitarianism in the world? Like, and like, yeah, like especially artists in the United States, I think that there is a specific role, and like, yeah, that comes with theory, that comes with understanding of the world. It helps us stay grounded and avoid sort of a critique of everything results in a very self-satisfied, lonely individual, possibly with a couple of contracts that help them pay for rent, but not much more. And I think that like, we live in a world of contradictions. I think that like artists, like there are artists who do need to rely on their artwork more for wages, and there are artists who need to rely on it less. And like I think there are ways in which like I got folks I know who like make money off their work and do corporate clients, and I think that there's a way in which like you have to make decisions as an artist. I think also you have to engage with reality and sort of like if you need food, that makes sense. I think also if you need to then connect your work in a broader sense to the struggle, though. It's not like you individually get to pick and choose, oh, well, this is the number of corporate clients that I'm going to do, and occasionally I'm going to try and do something for like the community org. It's like, no, you have to build your life more centered on that struggle. Like there's no life without contradictions, but I think like the way at least I see it is very much I need to engage in a struggle against capitalism and against the ruling class, and none of us will escape life without contradictions and compromises, but unless you're centering what you're doing and where you're going on that long-term struggle, you're always going to end up essentially being at best commodified by capitalism, at worst just used and discarded, neither of which I think is a goal for any of us.
Yeah, well said.
I'm doing a bad job of interviewing because I'm talking too much. So I thank you for listening.
No, I think we want to hear what you have to say. We're such big fans of yours that this is like it goes both ways.
We all just virtually high five for an hour. And I am really bummed that Rachel couldn't join us, because that's like another person whose work I've admired from afar for a long time. I'm going to keep shouting her out.
Same here.
And another person who I think has a similar, like sometimes, I want us all to be very connected to movement. I also sometimes want to lift up comrade artists and be like, no, but you actually get to also be proud of your artwork. You get to do both. You get to be happy with what you've made in addition to making it for the movement and for the people. And so,
for everyone that watches this after, you can follow Rachel's work on Instagram, at least, at Muva Gaia, which is MUVAGAIA, I believe. So,
and I'll tag her and everybody's work in the whatever you're watching this on. We'll have a tag attached to it. I know technology. Cool. Well, I think we're coming up on our hour. My computer clock is somehow 5 minutes off, despite being on a computer connected to the internet. I don't understand how that happens. But I think like maybe if we want to close out with one final question, do you have any specific advice for an artist who maybe like sees your work, loves your work, has been practicing and really wants to start making more politicized artwork and start using their work to really change the world? Like, obviously we've said a lot of things this whole episode, but like, is there maybe like a first couple of steps you'd offer, like maybe like stuff you'd hand them or advice you'd quickly give them in maybe a short 3 to 5 minute segment?
I would say the first thing you do is join a revolutionary organization. Second thing you do is you learn and study from movements of the past and look at how you can incorporate your own style. And then the third thing is read Lenin. So that's what I would say.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's all great. I second all that, and I would add just, I mean, maybe you mentioned this, Shenby, but to study the revolutionary artists of the past. I mean, there's such brilliant stuff that existed in the early 1900s. I'd say like 1910 through like 1960 or so. I mean, it's all great. Like all art is great, right? But there's some really, like especially in the early days of, you know, like, so the early days of the Soviet Union, you know, the early days of the PRC, the early days of the DPRK, there's like such revolutionary fervor behind that art. And it's like, it's really inspiring. It's contagious, you know? And so I think just as an artist, you know, we don't do things in a vacuum. So I would say study theory, make sure that what you're doing, you know, is in line with theory 100%. Join a revolutionary organization, join a revolutionary party, subsume your work into that organization. You know, don't necessarily fall into the trap of like the individualistic, idealistic artist, you know, creating art for art's sake, because that just becomes, it's supportive of fascism at a certain point, you know. Yeah, subsume your work into an organization, try to erase the personal. I mean, there is a lot of personal fulfillment there that happens, but, you know, yeah, do what you can to sort of like lift up the masses and not yourself, you know.
I think one of the last things that I forgot to mention is that whatever your style is, it can be used for the revolution. A lot of people think they have to make this particular type of art look this way, but no, like if you love drawing like animals and flowers, hell yeah, that's gorgeous. I love it. See how you can use that for the benefit of the people. If you like drawing cars, see how you can use that for the benefit of the people. If you are a sculptor, see how you can use that for the benefit of the people. Whatever it is, it can be used for the movement.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think just to add one more thing, I think I would also say that like, while I think all of our goal is not to become successful artists, but to have a successful revolutionary movement in which our art contributes, I think also like the like dialectic of that is also like your voice as an individual is also useful to that revolutionary movement. You like, I think all of every person who joins the movement and like adds their voice to it by becoming part of the whole, you don't lose who you are as an individual within that entirely. You lose the focus on yourself as an individual. Like I think like the beauty I see there is in seeing so many new voices, so many new perspectives. Like Leninism seen by one person isn't Leninism. I think Leninism seen by all the people and all their perspectives adding together. And like, that's why we need, like, if you're listening to this, that's why we need you to make new art. That's why we need you to organize with your neighbors. It's because it needs all of us to actually make it real. So yeah, maybe one more pass around of name, pronouns, and anything. If you got a project you want to shout out, an org you want to shout out, or a social media, and we'll close this out.
Sure. My name's Shenby. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation based in Columbus, Ohio. My pronouns are they, she. I encourage everyone to go to liberationstore.org or 1804books.org, get a copy of Socialist Reconstruction. It is a vision of what our beautiful future could look like once we achieve power. Something to inspire us all. I got the chance to do some illustrations inside it. Check it out. You can find more of my work at Left Aesthetic on Instagram.
Awesome. Yeah, Ben Stahnke, he, him pronouns. On Twitter, we're at PLB Magazine. Same on Facebook, same on Instagram. Organizations. Once again, I'm an organizer with the Communist Party in the US. We don't have anything as cool as Socialist Reconstruction. It's a great and a fantastic book, and I would emphasize that. However, personal projects for the Center for Communist Studies and Peace, Land, and Bread, I would just say give us a follow on social media. We have a lot of really fantastic books coming out soon. We work with comrades in the PSL and in the CPUSA and Unaligned, just revolutionary sort of folks. We've got more books than I could mention coming out. So I would just say, just keep an eye on our social media for the books coming out. And, as always, if you're interested in, submitting a manuscript or a piece of artwork or an article, just, reach out to us and at editors@peacelandbread.com, I think is our email. Yeah, hit us up.
Awesome. The current show that both these folks' work is in, as well as Rachel's work and a whole bunch of other folks, is The World We Need over at Swords into Plowshares, Peace Center and Gallery. And if you're looking for a present for your lefty friend in your life, we actually have both of these folks' work for sale, very reasonably priced. We already spent the money printing them out. Help us make that money back to at least break even. That's my goal.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, it's really incredible stuff. It's nice to have in person. I'm probably going to make a purchase, but it's just a quick shout out. The money goes to them and to the gallery, so it all works out. But yeah, come down, check out the show. It's up to November 20th. Thank you both for joining us. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. This is really fantastic. And once again, I just appreciate both your all work so much, and just keep it up. Keep up the excellent work, and you continue to inspire me.
Thank you. And I'll echo all of that.
Awesome.